You! What are you doing here?
Making sure nobody gets left behind. Can you stand if I help you?
I think so, but why did you come back? After what happened today, you could have walked away.
Not while someone was still inside.
How do you even know where we're going?
Buildings leave clues when systems fail.
What did you just see?
Something here doesn't look right. We get outside first. Then I'll explain.
You think that matters, don't you? Why would you risk your life for me?
Because who you are doesn't decide whether you matter.
The hardest person to save is often the one who never believed you belonged in the room. By the time the first fire engine rounded the corner of West Madison Street, the glass tower of Whitmore Holdings had already become a silhouette wrapped in thick gray smoke against the Chicago night. Red and blue lights painted the sidewalks while office workers stood behind the safety barriers, wrapped in blankets, clutching phones, whispering names, counting faces. Someone pointed upward. Someone else prayed under their breath. The air smelled of wet concrete, melted plastic, and the sharp bite of burned wiring. Then a figure emerged from the side entrance, moving slowly through the haze with steady determination. Marcus Brooks carried a young woman in his arms as though she weighed nothing at all. His dark t-shirt was streaked with soot, his breathing heavy but controlled, his eyes fixed on the waiting paramedics instead of the crowd surrounding him. The woman rested against his shoulder, unconscious but breathing, one hand loosely clutching the sleeve of the man she had dismissed only hours before. Cameras flashed. A firefighter rushed forward with a stretcher. "Sir, over here." Marcus carefully lowered her into the waiting hands of the emergency team, stepping back without a single dramatic word. One paramedic looked at him in disbelief. "You family." Marcus shook his head. "Friend." Again he shook his head. "Then why did you go back inside?" Marcus glanced once toward the burning building. Flames flickered behind the shattered windows high above, reflecting in his warm brown eyes before he quietly answered, "Because someone was still in there." The firefighter stared for a second longer. "You knew it was the CEO?" Marcus gave the faintest smile, tired but genuine. "I knew she was a person." Around them, reporters hurried closer, microphones raised, hungry for names, headlines, and heroic speeches. Marcus simply stepped aside, disappearing into the gathering crowd before anyone could stop him. No applause followed him. No interview. No celebration. Just quiet footsteps fading beneath the wail of sirens. Across the parking lot, Claire Whitmore opened her eyes for only a moment as paramedics checked her breathing. Her vision blurred beneath the flashing lights, but one image remained painfully clear. The face of the man she had looked straight through that afternoon. The same calm eyes, the same gentle expression, the same quiet dignity she had mistaken for weakness. Before exhaustion pulled her back into darkness, one unanswered question settled heavily inside her mind. Why would the man I rejected risk everything for me? 12 hours earlier, that question had never existed. Marcus Brooks had walked through the revolving doors of Whitmore Holdings carrying nothing more than a leather portfolio, a folder containing his small HVAC company's proposal, and the quiet hope that one opportunity could change life for himself and his 7-year-old daughter, Lily. Outside, downtown Chicago buzzed with lunchtime traffic. Inside, polished marble floors reflected expensive suits, confident footsteps, and conversations measured in millions of dollars. Marcus adjusted the strap of his worn messenger bag and looked briefly at the family photo tucked inside the front pocket. Lily's bright smile looked back at him beneath 2 missing front teeth. "Good luck, Daddy," she had whispered that morning before climbing onto her school bus. He smiled at the memory, straightened his shoulders, and walked toward the reception desk, unaware that before the sun disappeared beyond the skyline, both his life and Claire Whitmore's would be changed forever. Marcus stepped through the revolving doors with the quiet confidence of a man who had learned long ago that dignity was something no one could hand you and no one could take away. The receptionist offered a polite smile before glancing at the company name printed across his folder. Brooks Climate Solutions. Her expression softened into professional uncertainty. "Do you have an appointment, sir?" Marcus nodded. 11:30 with the facilities procurement office. She checked her screen, then frowned slightly. Please have a seat. Someone will be with you shortly. Around him, executives crossed the marble lobby carrying expensive coffee cups and conversations about acquisitions, market shares, and quarterly forecasts. Nobody noticed the tall African-American father sitting quietly beside the indoor fountain, except an elderly janitor pushing a cleaning cart. The man smiled warmly. Marcus smiled back. Sometimes kindness recognized itself without introductions. 20 minutes later, a young assistant hurried across the lobby. Mr. Brooks. Marcus stood immediately. Miss Whitmore has decided to review the final vendor presentations herself. This way, please. The elevator climbed toward the executive floor in complete silence. Through the glass walls, Chicago stretched beneath them like a living map. Marcus thought briefly about Lily sitting in her second-grade classroom, probably drawing another picture of the little house she always promised they would own someday. He touched the edge of the folded drawing tucked inside his notebook. It reminded him why he was here. The boardroom overlooked the river, filled with sunlight and polished oak. Claire Whitmore stood near the windows speaking with two executives. She turned only after finishing her sentence. Her platinum blonde hair rested neatly over one shoulder. Every detail of her appearance calm, precise, controlled. She accepted Marcus's proposal without shaking his hand. Mr. Brooks, she said evenly, your company has fewer than 10 employees. Marcus answered without hesitation. 9, including me. Your largest completed project? A regional medical clinic outside Naperville. One executive quietly exchanged a glance with another. Claire noticed. Whitmore Holdings manages over 3 million square feet of commercial property. This contract requires resources beyond your company's capacity. Marcus remained composed. Respectfully, every large company was once trusted with its first major opportunity. Claire studied him for only a moment before placing the proposal back onto the conference table. I appreciate your optimism. However, I do not award contracts based on optimism. The room fell silent. Marcus slowly gathered his papers without rushing. Thank you for your time, Miss Whitmore. His voice carried no resentment, no disappointment, only quiet respect. As he reached the doorway, one senior manager whispered just loudly enough for others to hear. Sometimes ambition forgets its place. Marcus paused for half a second, but never turned around. The elderly janitor from downstairs happened to be replacing a trash liner outside the conference room. He looked at Marcus with sympathetic eyes. Marcus simply smiled. Have a good afternoon. The older man nodded. You too, son. Claire watched through the glass as Marcus disappeared into the elevator. Something about his calm exit unsettled her. Most rejected vendors argued. Some demanded explanations. Others tried negotiating. He had done none of those things. You ended that quickly, one board member remarked. Claire answered without looking away from the closing elevator doors. Business requires difficult decisions. Yet even as she spoke, she remembered one small detail she could not explain. Before leaving, Marcus had carefully straightened the chair he had used, quietly returning the room to exactly the way he had found it. It was such a small gesture that nobody else noticed. Nobody except Claire. Meanwhile, Marcus stepped outside into the cool afternoon air. His phone vibrated. A photo message from Lily appeared on the screen. She had drawn the two of them holding hands beneath a bright blue sky. Across the top, written in careful second-grade handwriting, were the words, "No matter what happens today, you are still my hero, Daddy." Marcus smiled to himself, folded the phone back into his pocket, and started walking, unaware that before nightfall fate would bring him back to the very building he had just quietly left. If you are enjoying this story so far, do not forget to like this video and subscribe to Black Dad Destiny. Every day, we bring you touching stories, emotional love stories, and unforgettable journeys inspired by the moments that change people's lives forever. The afternoon sun slipped lower across the Chicago skyline as Marcus drove his aging white service van through neighborhoods where brick apartment buildings slowly replaced polished glass towers. The city always seemed to wear two different faces depending on which direction you were headed. Downtown reflected ambition. Home reflected endurance. Marcus preferred the second one. It reminded him what truly mattered. He stopped outside Lincoln Elementary just as the final school bell echoed across the playground. Children poured through the front doors carrying oversized backpacks, unfinished conversations, and the kind of energy adults spent entire vacations trying to recover. A small voice rose above the crowd. "Daddy!" Lily Brooks sprinted toward him with her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. Marcus knelt before she reached him, catching her in a warm embrace. "How was my favorite second grader?" She grinned proudly. "I got every spelling word right. Even neighborhood." Marcus laughed softly. "That is a big one." She reached into her backpack and handed him another folded drawing. This time it showed a tiny repair truck parked beside an enormous skyscraper. Above both figures she had carefully written, "One day everybody will know my dad." Marcus looked at the picture a little longer than usual. "You already do," he whispered. They stopped at a neighborhood grocery store before heading home. Lily insisted on choosing apples instead of cookies because, as she explained very seriously, healthy food costs less than doctors. Marcus smiled. That sounded exactly like something his late mother would have said. At the checkout counter, an elderly woman struggled to lift 2 heavy grocery bags into her cart. Without saying a word, Marcus picked them up and carried them to her car. "Thank you, young man," she said warmly. "You remind me that good people still exist." Marcus simply nodded. "Safe drive home, ma'am." Lily watched quietly from the passenger seat afterward. "Daddy." "Yes." "Do you help people because they might help you back?" Marcus started the engine before answering. "No, sweetheart." "Then why?" He glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "Because every person is carrying something we cannot see." Lily considered that answer for several seconds before smiling to herself. Across the city, Claire Whitmore remained inside the executive boardroom long after the afternoon meetings had ended. The contract proposals still rested neatly on the conference table, but one folder remained slightly separated from the others. Brooks Climate Solutions. She reached for it almost absent-mindedly. The financial numbers had not changed. The company was still too small. The decision was still correct. Yet something refused to settle. "You are still thinking about the contractor?" asked Daniel Pierce, Whitmore Holdings' chief financial officer, as he entered carrying another stack of reports. Claire closed the folder. "No." Daniel smiled knowingly. "Interesting. Most people say no faster when the answer is yes." Claire ignored the observation and walked toward the window overlooking the river. Evening traffic stretched beneath the glass like glowing ribbons of red and white. "Competence matters," she said quietly. "Feelings do not." Daniel hesitated before responding. "Sometimes character becomes competence when people are finally given the chance." Claire remained silent. She remembered Marcus quietly straightening his chair before leaving. She remembered him thanking everyone despite being rejected. She remembered the absence of bitterness in his eyes. None of those qualities appeared on a balance sheet. Her phone vibrated. Building operations had reported intermittent electrical fluctuations on the upper executive floors. Maintenance recommended shutting down part of the system overnight for a complete inspection. Claire looked briefly at the notification before dismissing it. There was an investor reception beginning within the hour. Hundreds of guests were expected. "Schedule maintenance after tomorrow," she instructed her assistant. "Tonight is not possible." The message disappeared from her screen almost as quickly as it had arrived. Far below, unnoticed by everyone inside the tower, one security camera briefly flickered before returning to normal. In another corner of the building, a small warning light inside an electrical control panel blinked once, then twice, before settling into an uneasy silence. Miles away, Marcus and Lily sat together at their tiny kitchen table eating homemade vegetable soup, while rain clouds quietly gathered beyond the apartment window, neither of them realizing that before the night was over, the path that seemed to have ended inside Claire Whitmore's boardroom was about to begin again. Rain began as a soft whisper against the apartment windows, the kind that usually helped Lily fall asleep within minutes. Marcus tucked the blanket around her shoulders and kissed the top of her head before switching off the bedroom light. "Good night, sweetheart." Lily looked up with sleepy eyes. "Daddy." "Yes." "Did the lady in the tall building ever call you back?" Marcus smiled gently. "No. Maybe she will tomorrow." He brushed a curl away from her forehead. "Maybe. But if she does not, another door will open." Lily yawned. "You always say that." "Because it is usually true." Within moments, she drifted into peaceful sleep, still clutching the drawing she had made that afternoon. Marcus quietly closed the bedroom door and settled at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and a stack of invoices. Outside, Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the skyline. Across downtown Chicago, the ballroom inside Whitmore Holdings sparkled beneath crystal chandeliers. Investors, executives, and civic leaders moved through the elegant reception with polished smiles and practiced conversations. Claire Whitmore greeted each guest with calm professionalism, yet her attention wandered more often than she cared to admit. During a brief pause between introductions, Daniel Pierce approached with 2 glasses of sparkling water. "You have looked out that window 3 times in 10 minutes, he observed. Claire accepted the glass without drinking. "I am thinking about tomorrow's expansion meeting." Daniel gave her a knowing look. "Or perhaps you are thinking about the contractor who thanked you after you rejected him." Claire almost smiled before catching herself. "You enjoy making assumptions." "Sometimes." He lowered his voice. "You know, I asked facilities about Brooks Climate Solutions after the meeting." Claire turned toward him. "Why?" "Curiosity." He shrugged. "No lawsuits. No complaints. Every reference praised one thing above everything else." "What?" "Integrity." Before Claire could answer, the ballroom lights flickered once. Conversations paused for only a heartbeat before the electricity returned. Guests laughed nervously and resumed talking. Daniel glanced toward the ceiling. "That is unusual." Claire remembered the maintenance notification she had dismissed earlier. "Call building operations," she said quietly. Daniel nodded and stepped away, but before he reached the exit, another brief flicker passed through the room, this one lasting slightly longer. Far below, inside the mechanical levels, an aging electrical relay emitted a faint humming sound that echoed through the empty service corridor. A maintenance technician frowned at the control panel. "That should not be doing that," he murmured into his radio. Static answered instead of a voice. He tried again. Nothing. The signal had disappeared. 20 minutes later, Marcus loaded a toolbox into his service van after receiving an emergency call from an elderly customer whose furnace had stopped working. "I can be there in 30 minutes, he had promised. Helping people after hours rarely brought much profit, but it brought peace of mind, and peace had always paid him better than money. As he drove toward the western suburbs, the skyline glowed ahead through sheets of rain. Then traffic slowed unexpectedly. Several drivers stepped from their vehicles, staring toward downtown. Marcus followed their gaze. A distant column of smoke rose into the dark sky above the city, illuminated by flashing emergency lights. He instinctively reached for the radio. "Crews responding to an active emergency at Whitmore Holdings Tower," the announcer reported. Marcus tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Whitmore Holdings. For a brief second, he saw Claire standing in the boardroom exactly as she had only hours before, confident, composed, impossible to read. Then another thought arrived, even faster. Investor reception. Hundreds of people. He pulled onto the shoulder, staring silently at the smoke climbing higher into the rain. His phone buzzed. It was his neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez. "Marcus, Lily is sleeping just fine. Do not worry about coming back. I will stay with her until you finish your service call." Marcus looked once more toward the growing glow over downtown. He whispered almost to himself, "Thank you." Then, without another word, he turned the steering wheel away from the quiet suburban street and headed back toward the city, following the distant lights that reflected against the storm clouds like a silent invitation he could not ignore. The closer Marcus drove toward downtown, the brighter the night became. Emergency lights reflected across rain-soaked streets like rivers of red and blue, while the upper floors of Whitmore Holdings disappeared behind thick gray smoke. Police officers redirected traffic. Firefighters hurried between engines, carrying hoses and equipment with calm precision. Office employees stood behind barricades wrapped in blankets, their faces pale with worry as names were called and attendance lists checked again and again. Marcus pulled his van to the curb several blocks away. He climbed out, grabbed the compact flashlight and multipurpose tool that always rode beside his driver's seat, then walked quickly toward the command area. A firefighter raised a hand. "Sir, this area is restricted." Marcus stopped immediately. "I understand. I am an HVAC contractor. I worked in commercial buildings for years. Is everyone out?" The firefighter looked toward another crew member before answering. "Almost everyone. Almost." The single word settled heavily inside Marcus's chest. Nearby, Daniel Pierce stood drenched by the rain, speaking urgently into a phone that no longer seemed to connect. His face carried none of the confidence it had worn inside the boardroom. "Claire is still upstairs," he said to the incident commander. She went back to retrieve confidential documents after the first evacuation alarm. Security lost contact with her a few minutes later. Marcus closed his eyes for only a second. He remembered Lily asking whether the woman from the tall building would ever call back. He remembered Claire returning his proposal without anger, only certainty. He remembered the elderly woman at the grocery store thanking him for carrying her bags. Every face seemed connected by one quiet truth. Every person mattered. The firefighter noticed Marcus still standing there. "Sir, please move behind the barrier." Marcus nodded, respectfully, but his eyes drifted toward the familiar mechanical access entrance along the east side of the building. During the afternoon meeting, he had noticed the exterior ventilation layout while waiting in the lobby. Old habits never disappeared. HVAC technicians learned to read buildings the way sailors read the sea. He quietly asked, "Does the East Service Corridor connect to the executive elevator lobby?" The firefighter blinked. "How do you know that?" "Because of the intake vents. It is an older mechanical design." Before the firefighter could respond, another emergency crew member hurried over. "The East Corridor is still accessible, but visibility inside keeps changing. We are evaluating the safest approach." Marcus looked once toward the dark sky, where rain continued falling in steady sheets. Then he looked back at the tower. "If someone is alone in the executive offices," he said softly, "she will probably try reaching the mechanical stairwell instead of the main elevators. That is what most people do when they cannot see familiar exits." The firefighter studied him carefully. "You sound very certain." Marcus answered with quiet honesty. "I have spent 20 years fixing buildings. When systems fail, people follow what feels familiar." A brief silence passed between them. Then another firefighter emerged from the command post. "We still have no confirmation on the executive floor." Marcus felt something settle inside him. Not panic, not excitement, just clarity. He removed his wedding band chain from beneath his shirt, where he still carried the ring of the wife he had lost years earlier, and held it for a brief moment before slipping it safely back beneath the fabric. "Come home," he whispered, though whether he was speaking to himself or remembering an old promise, even he could not say. Lily's drawing rested inside his jacket pocket, slightly folded but dry. He touched it gently, smiled, and took one slow breath. Sometimes courage was loud. Sometimes it sounded exactly like a father quietly deciding that another little girl, another son, another family should not spend tomorrow wondering why nobody tried one more time. The incident commander watched Marcus for a long moment before speaking. "You understand that if you go beyond that door, you follow our instructions without hesitation." Marcus nodded once. "Yes, sir." One firefighter handed him a spare safety helmet and a lightweight emergency mask. "Stay close. If we tell you to turn back, you turn back." Marcus accepted both with quiet gratitude. "Thank you." Together, they entered through the east mechanical access where the air felt strangely still despite the alarms echoing through the structure. Emergency lights cast soft red pulses along the concrete corridor, while ceiling sprinklers left the floor covered in a thin layer of water. Marcus immediately recognized the layout. Old ventilation shafts, utility access panels, service stairwells tucked behind maintenance doors. The building spoke a language he had understood his entire adult life. One firefighter pointed ahead. "Executive level is above us. Elevators are offline." Marcus glanced toward a ventilation map mounted on the wall. "There is another stairwell beyond the air handling room," he said quietly. "It reconnects near the conference suites." The firefighter studied the map, then looked back at Marcus with surprise. "You are right." They continued upward, moving carefully through increasingly dim hallways. Every sound became important. Water dripping, metal settling, distant emergency radios. Then Marcus stopped walking. He raised one hand. "Listen." Everyone fell silent. Faintly, somewhere beyond the corridor, something tapped against glass. 3 slow taps. Then silence. Then 3 more. "Someone is there," Marcus whispered. They followed the sound until they reached a smoke-resistant conference area where visibility improved slightly. Near the windows, Claire Whitmore sat against the wall, exhausted but conscious. She had wrapped her suit jacket around the shoulders of a young administrative assistant who looked frightened but otherwise unharmed. Claire looked up as footsteps approached. For one brief second, Relief crossed her face before recognition replaced it. You? She whispered through tired breaths. Marcus knelt beside the assistant first. Are you hurt? The young woman slowly shook her head. Just scared. Marcus smiled gently. That is understandable. Only then did he turn toward Claire. Can you stand? She nodded, though not very confidently. I think so. One firefighter quickly assessed both women before speaking into his radio. We have located 2 occupants. Beginning evacuation. Marcus helped the young assistant to her feet, while another firefighter supported Claire. As they prepared to leave, Claire looked directly at Marcus, confusion filling her bright blue eyes. You should not be here, she said softly. Marcus answered with the same calm voice she remembered from the boardroom. Neither should you. Despite everything happening around them, Claire almost laughed. It was the first genuine expression she had shown all day. As they carefully made their way toward the stairwell, the young assistant suddenly stopped. My laptop, she whispered. It has every scholarship application for tomorrow's student program. Marcus gently shook his head. People first. Everything else can be replaced. The assistant lowered her eyes and nodded. Claire heard every word. They continued downward together, each step carrying them farther from fear and closer to the waiting emergency crews outside. Along the way they passed several maintenance rooms. Marcus instinctively glanced toward one electrical control cabinet. Its access panel hung slightly open. Rainwater could not have reached this location, yet fresh tool marks surrounded 2 of the mounting screws. He frowned for only a second before quietly closing the panel with his hand. Something about it did not feel right. He said nothing. This was not the time. Outside, the rain had begun washing the smoke from the night sky as the exit doors finally came into view. Fresh air drifted inside. Claire slowed for a single moment and looked at Marcus again. The man she had measured only by the size of his company had somehow become the reason she was walking back into the world. She searched for the right words, but found only one. Why? Marcus looked ahead toward the open doorway where flashing lights reflected across the wet pavement. His answer came as naturally as breathing. Because someday I hope my daughter grows up in a world where people choose compassion before judgment. Claire lowered her eyes. For the first time in many years, silence taught her more than success ever had. The moment the group stepped through the lobby doors, cool rain washed across their faces, replacing the heavy air inside with something that felt almost unreal. Cheers erupted from employees gathered behind the safety barriers as paramedics hurried forward to examine Claire and the young assistant. Camera flashes lit the sidewalk again, but Marcus instinctively stepped backward, allowing the attention to settle on those who needed it most. One reporter pushed through the crowd. Sir, what is your name? Marcus simply smiled politely and continued walking toward the edge of the gathering. Another voice called after him. Were you part of the rescue team? He paused for only a heartbeat before answering. No, I was just someone who happened to be nearby. Then he kept walking. Across the parking area, Daniel Pierce hurried toward him. His expensive suit was soaked by the rain, and for the first time since Marcus had met him, there was no trace of executive confidence in his expression. Only gratitude. Mr. Brooks. Marcus stopped. Daniel extended his hand with complete sincerity. I owe you more than I can possibly say. Marcus accepted the handshake. You do not owe me anything. You saved Claire. Marcus gently shook his head. The firefighters saved all of us. I only followed people who knew what they were doing. Daniel looked at him carefully, realizing humility was not something Marcus performed. It was simply who he was. Behind them, Claire finished speaking with the paramedics. Though physically exhausted, she quietly excused herself from several reporters and walked directly toward Marcus. The crowd noticed immediately. Conversations softened. Cameras turned. Claire stopped a few feet away, her composed posture replaced by something unfamiliar. Vulnerability. Mr. Brooks. Marcus faced her calmly. Miss Whitmore. For several seconds neither spoke. Finally, Claire looked down before meeting his eyes again. This afternoon, I judged your company. Before I ever tried to understand the person standing in front of me. Marcus remained silent. Tonight, she continued softly. That same person carried hope into a place where I had almost lost mine. Rain continued falling between them. Claire reached into her handbag and removed a business check already signed except for the amount. Please, let me do something. Marcus glanced at the check but never reached for it. I appreciate your kindness. Claire took one small step forward. This is not kindness. It is gratitude. Marcus smiled with the same quiet warmth Lily knew so well. If you really wish to thank me, there is a better way. Claire waited. The scholarship program your assistant mentioned. Make sure every student receives the opportunity they worked for tomorrow. Claire blinked, surprised. That is all. Marcus nodded. Children should never lose tomorrow because adults had a difficult night. Daniel lowered his head. Even several firefighters standing nearby exchanged silent glances. Claire slowly folded the unsigned check back into her handbag. You continue surprising me. Marcus gave a gentle laugh. My daughter says the same thing sometimes. At the mention of Lily, Claire remembered the folded drawing she had glimpsed inside Marcus's notebook during the afternoon meeting. Suddenly, the polished conference room, the rejected proposal, and the quiet man who had carefully straightened his chair all returned with painful clarity. She realized that nothing about him had changed. Only her perspective had. As Marcus turned to leave, Claire spoke once more. Will I ever have another chance to speak with you? Marcus paused beside his service van. Life usually gives people another chance when they are willing to become different than they were yesterday. With that, he climbed into the driver's seat and drove away into the rainy Chicago night, leaving behind no business card, no request, no expectation, only a silence that lingered far longer than any speech could have. Claire stood watching the taillights disappear until they became two tiny red dots beyond the intersection. Then her eyes drifted upward toward the dark tower behind her. For the first time, she was not thinking about rebuilding a building. She was wondering how to rebuild her understanding of people. Before we continue, take a quick second to subscribe to Black Dad Destiny if you have not already. If you love powerful family dramas, surprising stories, real-life inspired journeys, and stories with meaningful life lessons, you are in the right place. Your support helps us create a brand new cinematic story every single day. Morning arrived wrapped in a pale gray sky, and Chicago seemed quieter than usual, as though the city itself needed time to recover from the previous night. Inside a private hospital suite overlooking the lake, Claire Whitmore stood beside the window with a cup of untouched coffee growing cold in her hands. She had already answered questions from investigators, spoken with insurance representatives, reassured board members, and postponed 3 international meetings. Yet none of those conversations stayed with her. Only one voice did. Because someday I hope my daughter grows up in a world where people choose compassion before judgment. The sentence replayed again and again, refusing to leave. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Daniel Pierce stepped inside carrying a thin folder. The preliminary inspection reports, he said quietly before noticing the untouched coffee. You have not slept much. Claire accepted the folder without opening it. Did you find him? Daniel smiled faintly. I thought you might ask. He placed another file beside the first. Brooks Climate Solutions. Claire slowly opened it. There were no headlines about heroic rescues. No awards. No impressive corporate achievements. Instead, she found handwritten thank you letters from elderly homeowners, community organizations, and small businesses. One letter simply read, "He repaired our furnace on Christmas Eve and refused to charge us because he said every child deserved a warm home." Another came from a public elementary school thanking Marcus for replacing classroom air filters free of charge during allergy season. Claire continued reading in complete silence. There is more, Daniel said softly. His wife passed away 6 years ago. He has been raising Lily by himself ever since. Claire looked down at a school photograph clipped inside the file. Marcus stood beside a smiling little girl with missing front teeth, both of them laughing as though the camera had caught a real moment instead of a posed one. She looks happy, Claire whispered. Daniel nodded. Every reference we contacted said the same thing. He never talks about what he has lost, only about what his daughter still deserves. Claire closed the folder slowly. She suddenly remembered the drawing she had noticed inside Marcus's notebook. One day, everybody will know my dad. Her chest tightened, not from guilt alone, but from realizing that the little girl had already seen the greatness everyone else had overlooked. Daniel hesitated before placing one final document on the table. There is something else. Claire looked up. The fire investigation. His expression changed. The electrical failure may not have been accidental. Claire opened the report. Photographs showed an access panel inside the mechanical room with fresh tool marks surrounding 2 mounting screws. Exactly where Marcus had quietly paused before leading everyone downstairs. The investigators believe someone tampered with the system before the investor reception, Daniel explained. Claire remained perfectly still. Who had access? Only a handful of senior personnel and approved contractors. Silence settled over the room. The question was no longer only how the emergency had started. It was who had wanted it to happen. Claire walked back to the window, watching the city slowly wake beneath the morning light. Somewhere beyond those streets, Marcus was probably making breakfast for Lily before school, completely unaware that his quiet observation inside the mechanical corridor might become the most important clue in the investigation. She turned back toward Daniel with a calmness that felt different from the confidence she had carried before. Softer, more deliberate. Clear my schedule for this afternoon. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Where are you going? Claire looked once more at the photograph of Marcus and Lily before answering. Yesterday, I judged a business proposal. Today, I intend to meet the man I should have seen in the first place. And before this is over, I also intend to learn who tried to turn my company into the scene of a tragedy. Outside the hospital window, sunlight finally broke through the clouds, spreading across the skyline with quiet determination, much like the kind of hope that never announced its arrival, but somehow managed to change everything. Claire arrived just after 3 in the afternoon, not in a motorcade or surrounded by assistants, but alone in a simple sedan that blended quietly into the neighborhood. Brooks Climate Solutions occupied a modest brick building beside a family-owned hardware store. The painted sign above the entrance showed years of honest weather instead of expensive renovations. Through the front window, she saw Marcus kneeling beside an old air conditioning unit while patiently explaining something to a young apprentice. He did not notice her immediately. Never replace a part before you understand why it failed, he said calmly. Machines are not very different from people. If you ignore the real problem, it will always return. The apprentice nodded thoughtfully. Only then did Marcus look toward the doorway. For a brief moment, surprise crossed his face before settling into the familiar calm Claire had come to recognize. Miss Whitmore. She smiled softly. I hope I am not interrupting. Marcus stood and wiped his hands on a clean work towel. Not at all. The apprentice quietly excused himself, leaving them alone. For several seconds, neither spoke. The silence felt different now. It no longer belonged to strangers. Claire looked around the small workshop. Family photographs rested on a shelf beside service manuals. Children's drawings were attached to a bulletin board with magnets shaped like stars. Every corner reflected care instead of wealth. This is exactly how I imagined it, she admitted. Marcus smiled. I'm not sure whether that is a compliment. It is. She looked directly at him. Yesterday, I evaluated your company by its size. Today, I realize I never measured the things that mattered most. Marcus leaned lightly against the workbench. We all make decisions with the information we have. Claire slowly shook her head. No. Sometimes we make decisions with assumptions instead. Before Marcus could answer, the front door opened again. Lily hurried inside, carrying her backpack almost as large as she was. Daddy, my teacher said. She stopped the moment she noticed Claire. Marcus knelt beside her. Lily, this is Miss Whitmore. Lily offered an innocent smile. Hello. Claire smiled back, just as warmly. Hello, Lily. The little girl looked from Claire to her father before reaching into her backpack. Daddy, I got my drawing back. She unfolded the familiar picture of the little repair truck beside the tall building. Claire recognized it instantly. Lily held it proudly toward her. That is my dad. He fixes things. Claire felt her eyes soften. I believe he does. Marcus gently rested a hand on Lily's shoulder. Why do not you wash up before dinner? Lily nodded and disappeared through the back office. Claire watched her go before speaking again. She believes in you without hesitation. Marcus answered quietly. Children usually see people more clearly than adults do. Claire reached into her handbag and removed a new folder instead of a check. This is not a contract. Marcus accepted it curiously. Inside was a proposal creating a long-term community facilities partnership between Whitmore Holdings and several neighborhood schools, with Brooks Climate Solutions recommended as the lead service provider because of its local reputation and educational outreach. This program will be awarded through an open review process, Claire explained. If your company earns it, it will be because of merit, not gratitude. Marcus looked up and smiled. That is the only way I would accept it. Claire nodded. I hoped you would say that. Her expression gradually became more serious. There is something else you should know. Investigators found evidence that the building systems may have been deliberately tampered with. The control panel you noticed could become an important piece of the investigation. Marcus closed the folder thoughtfully. Then I will tell them exactly what I saw. Thank you. Claire took one slow breath. Not only for that, for reminding me that leadership is not measured by the height of the building you stand in. It is measured by the lives you choose to lift. Marcus glanced toward the hallway where Lily was happily humming to herself. My daughter teaches me that every day. Claire smiled, and for the first time in years the smile reached her eyes without effort. As she walked toward the door, the late afternoon sun broke through the clouds, filling the workshop with warm light. It illuminated the drawings on the wall, the worn tools on the bench, and two people who had met through judgment but were leaving with mutual respect. Outside, the city continued searching for the person responsible for the tampered electrical system, while inside one small workshop something far quieter had already been repaired. It was trust, and sometimes that was the strongest foundation any future could ever stand upon. Every story leaves us with a question. What would you have done if you were in their place? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We would love to hear your perspective. If you enjoy touching stories, inspiring life journeys, emotional family dramas, and unforgettable love stories, do not forget to like, subscribe to Black Dad Destiny, and turn on notifications. A brand new cinematic story is waiting for you tomorrow.